A lawsuit against Harvard ending the first week of trial where at issue is whether the university imposes a cap on the number of qualified Asian American students that it admits. But is it really just an attempt to set back the entire notion of affirmative action? In the case known as Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, the plaintiffs argue that, quote, an Asian American applicant with a 25% chance of admission would have a 35% chance if he were white, 75% if he were Hispanic, 95% chance if he were African American. Their opening argument included a chart of characteristics of students who were much more likely to be admitted than Asian Americans. The top three categories: the intangible personal ratings, African Americans, and offspring of alumni. Joining me now is Adam Harris. He's a staff writer for The Atlantic and author of this piece, What the Harvard Trial is Really About. Okay, Adam, I will take the bait. What is the Harvard trial really about?
So, as you mentioned, kind of in the opening argument, there was this interesting moment where the lawyer for Students for Fair Admission says that the future of affirmative action is not on trial, and that's because there are decades of Supreme Court precedent. But then they slowly kind of proceed to make this argument that African Americans and Latinos are kind of unfairly benefiting in the admissions process. And the question was always, how do Students for Fair Admissions make this leap and turn this into a discrimination case against Asian Americans into a critique of affirmative action? And that's been made pretty clear over this first week of trial.
There was a question asked, I think on day one of trial. You reported on it. I'll give the question, you give the context and the meaning. Would you agree that race is a determinative factor for half of African Americans? Who asked? Why did they want that answer, and what was it?
So that question was asked by John Hughes, one of the lawyers for Students for Fair Admission. And essentially what he was trying to get the dean of admissions at Harvard to say, William Fitzsimmons, was essentially that race was the determinative factor in admissions for a group of black students. Because if race is a determinative factor on the positive side, then there's a chance that race is also a negative factor for Asian Americans.
Adam, 5% of the population, you correct me if I'm wrong because I think you're well versed in these numbers, 5% of the population Asian American, 22%, however, of the Harvard population. What if the plaintiffs win? What happens to the 22% at Harvard who are Asian American? How will it grow, and who will be impacted?
So if Students for Fair Admissions wins this trial and race is no longer used as a factor in the admissions process, you'll see a slight increase in the Asian American students population, roughly 3 to 5%. But you'll see a large increase in the white student population, and you see a precipitous decline in the black and Latino student population, about 50%, from 14% to 6% for African Americans, if I'm remembering correctly, and 14 to 9% for Latinos. 50% decline in those of color as well as Latinos at Harvard, according to that projection. Yes, and this is one of the things that Students for Fair Admission is trying to use to say that race is a determinative factor. But Harvard's argument is essentially that the Supreme Court says that we can use race in admissions to diversify our campus. And the argument that, if we did not use race in admissions, these students may not be at the institution. That kind of runs directly along with the Supreme Court's precedent to say that we need to use affirmative action to diversify our campus. And that is a goal, a noble goal, not only for black and Latino students, but also for white and Asian students to have kind of the educational benefits of affirmative action.
Adam, I have just 30 seconds left. I get the impression from your coverage that this is all a dress rehearsal. As an attorney, what I glean from your reportage is both sides are trying to protect this record because they know this isn't going to be the end of the issue.
Yes, this is kind of the dress rehearsal for a potential Supreme Court case. And right now the arguments are kind of, this is as much about the public perception of Harvard's admissions process as it is about the judge's perception at this point. Because as you're getting prepared to go in front of a friendlier Supreme Court that is against affirmative action, it's nice to have the public on your side. And so Students for Fair Admission has been making a lot of arguments, including legacies and donors, the children of donors, and these things that really gin up a lot of public angst.
Adam Harris, thank you. Well done. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.